The crisis of credit, visualized. What is the credit crisis? It's a worldwide financial fiasco involving terms you've probably heard like subprime mortgages, collateralized debt obligations, frozen credit markets, and credit default swaps. Who's affected? Everyone. How did it happen? Here's how. The credit crisis brings two groups of people together, homeowners and investors. Homeowners represent their mortgages, and investors represent their money. These mortgages represent houses, and this money represents large institutions like pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign funds, mutual funds, etc. These groups are brought together through the financial system, a bunch of banks and brokers commonly known as Wall Street. While it may not seem like it, these banks on Wall Street are closely connected to these houses on Main Street. To understand how, let's start at the beginning. Years ago, the investors are sitting on their pile of money, looking for a good investment to turn into more money. Traditionally, they go to the U.S. Federal Reserve, where they buy treasury bills, believed to be the safest investment. But in the wake of the dot-com bust in September 11th, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan lowers interest rates to only 1% to keep the economy strong. 1% is a very low return on investment, so the investors say, no thanks. On the flip side, this means banks on Wall Street can borrow from the Fed for only 1%. Add to that general surpluses from Japan, China, and the Middle East, and there's an abundance of cheap credit. This makes borrowing money easy for banks and causes them to go crazy with leverage. Leverage is borrowing money to amplify the outcome of a deal. Here's how it works. In a normal deal, someone with $10,000 buys a box for $10,000. He then sells it to someone else for $11,000. For a $1,000 profit, a good deal. But using leverage, someone with $10,000 would go borrow $990,000 more dollars, giving him $1 million in hand. Then he goes and buys 100 boxes with his $1 million and sells them to someone else for $1,100,000. Then he pays back his $990,000 plus $10,000 in interest. And after his initial $10,000, he's left with a $90,000 profit versus the other guy's $1,000. Leverage turns good deals into great deals. This is a major way banks make their money. So Wall Street takes out a ton of credit, makes great deals, and grows tremendously rich, and then pays it back. The investors see this and want a piece of the action, and this gives Wall Street an idea. They can connect the investors to the homeowners through mortgages. Here's how it works. A family wants a house, so they save for a down payment and contact a mortgage broker. The mortgage broker connects the family to a lender who gives them a mortgage. The broker makes a nice commission. The family buys a house and becomes homeowners. This is great for them because housing prices have been rising practically forever. Everything works out nicely. One day, the lender gets a call from an investment banker who wants to buy the mortgage. The lender sells it to him for a very nice fee. The investment banker then borrows millions of dollars and buys thousands more mortgages and puts them into a nice little box. This means that every month he gets the payments from the homeowners of all the mortgages in the box. Then he sicks his banker wizards on it to work their financial magic, which is basically cutting it into 3 slices: safe, okay, and risky. They pack the slices back up in the box and call it a Collateralized Debt Obligation, or CDO. A CDO works like 3 cascading trays. As money comes in, the top tray fills first, then spills over into the middle, and whatever is left into the bottom. The money comes from homeowners paying off their mortgages. If some owners don't pay and default on their mortgage, less money comes in and the bottom tray may not get filled. This makes the bottom tray riskier and the top tray safer. To compensate for the higher risk, the bottom tray receives a higher rate of return, while the top receives a lower, but still nice return. To make the top even safer, banks will insure it for a small fee called a credit default swap. The banks do all of this work so that credit rating agencies will stamp the top slice as a safe, AAA rated investment, the highest, safest rating there is. The OK slice is BBB, still pretty good, and they don't bother to rate the risky slice. Because of the AAA rating, the investment banker can sell the safe slice to the investors who only want safe investments. He sells the OK slice to other bankers, and the risky slices to hedge funds and other risk takers. The investment banker makes millions. He then repays his loans. Finally, the investors have found a good investment for their money, much better than the 1% Treasury bills. They're so pleased they want more CDO slices. So the investment banker calls up the lender, wanting more mortgages. The lender calls up the broker for more homeowners, but the broker can't find anyone. Everyone that qualifies for a mortgage already has one, but they have an idea. When homeowners default on their mortgage, the lender gets the house, and houses are always increasing in value. Since they're covered if the homeowners default, lenders can start adding risk to new mortgages, not requiring down payments, no proof of income, no documents at all. And that's exactly what they did. So instead of lending to responsible homeowners, called prime mortgages, they started to get some that were, well, less responsible. These are subprime mortgages. This is the turning point. So, just like always, the mortgage broker connects the family with a lender and a mortgage, making his commission. The family buys a big house. The lender sells the mortgage to the investment banker, who turns it into a CDO and sells slices to the investors and others. This actually works out nicely for everyone and makes them all rich. No one was worried because as soon as they sold the mortgage to the next guy, it was his problem. If the homeowners were to default, they didn't care. They were selling off their risk to the next guy and making millions, like playing hot potato with a time bomb. Not surprisingly, the homeowners default on their mortgage, which at this moment is owned by the banker. This means he forecloses and one of his monthly payments turns into a house. No big deal. He puts it up for sale. But more and more of his monthly payments turn into houses. Now there are so many houses for sale on the market, creating more supply than there is demand, and housing prices aren't rising anymore. In fact, they plummet. This creates an interesting problem for homeowners still paying their mortgages. As all the houses in their neighborhood go up for sale, the value of their house goes down, and they start to wonder why they're paying back their $300,000 mortgage when the house is now worth only $90,000. They decide that it doesn't make sense to continue paying, even though they can afford to, and they walk away from their house. Default rates sweep the country, and prices plummet. Now the investment banker is basically holding a box full of worthless houses. He calls up his buddy, the investor, to sell his CDO, but the investor isn't stupid and says, no thanks. He knows that the stream of money isn't even a dribble anymore. The banker tries to sell to everyone, but nobody wants to buy his bomb. He's freaking out because he borrowed millions, sometimes billions of dollars to buy this bomb, and he can't pay it back. Whatever he tries, he can't get rid of it. But he's not the only one. The investors have already bought thousands of these bombs. The lender calls up trying to sell his mortgage, but the banker won't buy it, and the broker is out of work. The whole financial system is frozen, and things get dark. Everybody starts going bankrupt. But that's not all. The investor calls up the homeowner and tells him that his investments are worthless. And you can begin to see how the crisis flows in a cycle. Welcome to the crisis of credit.
My name is Paddy Hirsch. I'm a senior editor at Marketplace, and I have a little diagram here which will show you how collateralized debt obligations work and how they've affected the financial system and given us the problems that we're in today. So what we have, first of all, is we have a CDO manager. This is a guy who decides to create a collateralized debt obligation. And what he has is, in this simile, he has a bottle of champagne. In order to fill this bottle, he goes out to investors and he asks them for money, just like any normal investors. These guys are bondholders. They give him a bunch of money, and what he does is he goes out and he buys a bunch of securities, and they can be anything you want. They can be loans, they can be credit card debt, they can be student loans, but in this case, they were mortgages. So he went out and he bought a bunch of mortgages, and he put them in his bottle. And what he did is he created the capital structure in the same way that a company has a capital structure. And we're going to show this capital structure like a pyramid of wine glasses, just like you have at the wedding. Maybe you have people pile up those glasses with the idea of pouring champagne into them, all set in a nice silver tray. And each of these glasses, as a security, is rated according to their riskiness. So the top rate is AAA, this is AA, triple B, double B. And this bottom, the tray, is the equity. We won't worry about that so much at this point. Now, at the end of every month, what happens is the cork pops off because all of these mortgages are paying interest. It causes a great deal of pressure, and all of the money from that interest flows out of the top and into the pyramid of glasses. Now, because these are the least risky and pay the least interest, they get filled up first. Then the second row gets filled up, then the third row gets filled up, finally the fourth row gets filled up, and then the equity tranche, the big silver tray at the bottom, gets filled up. And everybody's happy. Everybody gets paid, no problems at all. And that's what happened during the housing boom. Everybody got paid. But what happens whenever, say, one of these mortgages, or say 30% of these mortgages or mortgage holders stop paying their mortgage? Well, it means that there's a lot less interest being paid and a lot less bubbly coming out of the top of your champagne bottle. So it means that the first glass may get filled, hence the least risk and the lowest payment. The second set of glasses may get filled. Even the third set of glasses may get filled, but the last set of glasses does not get filled. They're empty. So it's a bit of a problem for these guys, also a problem for the equity holders, because they're not getting paid either. But you've got a whole asset class, a whole tranche of holders that are not being paid any interest at all. Of course, they're being compensated as a result, because their rate was 10% if they did get paid, whereas these guys were 7%, these guys got 5%, and these guys got 3%. Now, where this situation becomes complicated is where you have another asset manager who decides to go out and build a champagne bottle or have a champagne bottle, but instead of filling it with mortgages, what he decided to do was fill it with these mortgage-backed securities from the CDO. These are the mortgage-backed securities, and he took, say, one of the glasses from the bottom row from the double B because they paid 10%. In the boom, these glasses were generating 10% a month. So he filled this bottle up with these glasses that were generating 10% a month. Now that's no problem whenever this pyramid is full and everyone's paying their mortgages. But if only 30% pay and the bottom rung of glasses is not being filled up, well, suddenly this champagne bottle, when the cork pops at the end of the month, is generating 0. Now he has got his own pyramid of glasses. That is to say, he's got his own investors to satisfy. But unfortunately, when you have a bottle filled with glasses that are not being filled at the end of every month, then nothing is filling the top glasses, nothing is filling the second row, nothing is filling the third row, and yet they are still rated as if they were as safe as the original asset. Now this is the problem. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in this kind of secondary CDO. And this is the situation that we find ourselves in. These investment managers, CDO managers like this one here, have gone out and they've hawked these bonds to people all over the country, and in fact all over the world. Pension managers in Norway, through to people at CalPERS and pension managers and mutual fund managers here in the US. The net result is that these investors have packed our funds with these securities which are not paying anything now and are liable never to pay anything again, especially if the situation in the housing market persists and people either foreclose on their houses or stop paying mortgages or default or whatever it may be. The number of people actually paying their mortgages is decreasing, so therefore there's less and less foam coming out of this first bottle, less and less of these securities being filled, and therefore less and less of these AA highly rated securities actually making the money that they were supposed to make. The result is that we're in a mess of our own making, or a mess of these bank managers making, or these fund managers making. The fact that these securities have been poorly rated by the ratings agencies who did not understand the knock-on effect of a few people failing to pay their mortgages has left us all, well, frankly, as Rico says, needing a drink.
And also, he doesn't want to have $1 billion in loans bang on his balance sheet, because then he has to have more capital, more cash in his accounts because of capital adequacy requirements. So what Mr. JP Morgan does is he breaks this thing up into little bits. He looks for other lenders in his syndicate. This is called a syndication. So he creates a syndicate of lenders, and those include other banks. They include funds, hedge funds, and the like, and they also include people like John, people who create these CLOs. So John gets one of these little bits, once the syndication occurs. John gets this little, because he's in the syndicate, gets a little bit of this loan, pops it into his bottle with a whole bunch of other loans from other borrowers like Fred. So he's now got this bottle full of little loans. And you can see that how John is now, why it's so important that the collateralized loan obligation market improves. Because if there are lots of people like John, that means there are lots of bottles out there. And lots of people like John going to the banks, come on, we need to fill our bottles, make loans out to these guys so that we've got stuff to put in our bottles and we can make money down the line. Now JP Morgan says, well, I can certainly find people who want money. There's lots of those people out there. So it can originate loans, agent, as it calls, agent these syndicates, and funnel this money through the system and into these CLOs.
All right. Now I'm going to tie a few mystery things together. What has the United States government done in the last 2 weeks? They've started giving out loans like it's cotton candy. They call it the Coronavirus Small Business Guidance and Loan Resources. Now what they're doing is they're literally giving, I don't really want to go look into it now, but what they're literally doing is they're giving every American that made less than $75,000 in 2019 roughly $1,200 as a loan that won't have to be repaid ever. And then what they're doing is they're giving every small business a loan up to $200,000. But they're giving out all these loans because what's happening is the collateralized loan obligation market is completely dried up. The reason that the collateralized loan obligations have dried up is because historically, in order to get a loan from a bank for a house, a car, or even just debt consolidation, you have to literally go into the bank and submit several forms of paperwork and go to an interview and stuff like that. Well, all the banks in the U.S., the vast majority of them on the East Coast, West Coast, and Texas, where I'm at, are closed. All you can do is deposit and withdraw money via the outside the drive-through, and there's no way for the vast majority of people to create loans right now. So what that means is the collateralized loan obligation market is drying up furiously. In order to keep that from happening, the Trump administration has made a mad dash into the small business loans, and they're basically hyperinflating the United States currency right now, because they're just throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at anyone who will apply for a loan. Basically, I filled it out. I want to try to find it. I filled it out the other day. SBA small business. They're calling it a grant because you don't have to repay it, but underneath it's literally a loan. So anyway, what's happening is these bottles aren't being filled because the bottles, I mean, they're not even being able to be created anymore. And what the government is super, super concerned with is that starting on April 1st, I bet you a whole bunch of the renters and mortgage owners didn't pay for their mortgages or their rents. So in this case, it probably will be far more severe than the fiscal collapse of 2008. Because if we look at the unemployment wall, well, it's like literally a wall of people. Here we go. It's literally a wall of jobless claims, and this is from Missouri, but it looks almost identical for the entire U.S. You just see this wall that makes 2008, 2009 right here look like nothing, like a rounding error here. And I'm pretty sure that housing is going to look the same way in a month. Whenever they start getting this data out at the end of the month, I think it's going to show something just like that. See, that is just incredible. So there's the 2008 recession right there. And then to put it in their perspective, then to go way out to this graph. Remember when he said in the previous video that this first glass might be relatively okay, at least the top AAA tranche, but that greedy bankers will make another CDO out of that, and the secondary CDO market won't be filled at all when the primary is only partially unfilled, right? Well, what happens is that I'm guessing more than 10% of renters didn't pay their rent, and 10% of mortgages probably didn't get paid in the month of March and for April, and I think that's going to be even worse for the month of May. And so it's what the government is literally doing is they're trying to create these artificial loans that they're calling grants just to keep the economy from completely seizing up right now. But eventually what's going to happen is the US dollar is going to, like, it should hyperinflate if it was normal times, but you have to remember that the euro, the Chinese, well, maybe not the Chinese yuan, but definitely the euro is going to collapse. The euro is probably doomed as a currency, and maybe even the British pound and the Swiss franc, because they all have out of control coronavirus problems. The currency of safety is the United States dollar. So even though we might hyperinflate or do things to hyperinflate, there might be such a mad rush for literal dollars throughout the world that because we're the world's reserve currency for just a little bit longer, it may greatly stem the hyperinflation pressure. And so what we could see is something that's only happened a few times in history. But what you could see is demand for the dollar being so strong overseas that we have a shortage of actual physical dollars in America, at least for a period of time, particularly if there's a fear that the coronavirus could infect the money. And what that would do is lead to really, really strange things where things like bread and milk might increase 10 times or even 100 times. I mean, I go to Amazon and I look up, what's it called? Ramen. And then these used to sell for 20 cents a bag. And now they're many, many times that. So if we do 36 divided by 20. So they used to cost 20 cents. Now they're costing more like $1.80. And I've seen that repeated for ramen a whole bunch. And I've been seeing it for a whole wide range of common things. But yeah, if you really want to see hyperinflation, go to, what's it called? Brownie mix. Holy cow. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that I can get this for $2 at my local grocery store and it's selling for $21, 10 times price. You see all this brownie mix. You can still buy it for like $2 in Houston. Man. But anyway, you look at these resellers and they're all pretty much people like me. Where is it? See, they're all independent sellers. So I'm already seeing hyperinflation in certain food products. But what I really think will happen is that goods like cars, houses, stuff that you don't need to live necessarily will plummet in value, just like in 2008. TVs. It's going to be weird with electronics because maybe Asia still makes them, but no one's going to really want them. And as millions and millions of people become sick over the next 2 months, the shipping routes of the world will be primarily dedicated to medical supplies and food. I honestly believe that in June and July, the main focus will be on shipping food and masks to like literally everyone in the world. And there just won't be room on the trucks for things like TVs, and we're already seeing that with Amazon. I mean, if you go to Amazon right now, they have this whole entire thing. We're giving priority to items that our customers need the most, and so that's not your TV. That's not a new computer. So I seriously think that virtually all that trade will stop in the very near future. I mean, the stores are already mostly closed, but anyway. Going back to your mortgage, the important thing to realize is that your mortgage is being traded right now. The usual mortgage ends up being traded six times every 5 years on average. However, when economic times get very scary, like they've been since early March, these banks and investment pools and whatever, they start selling mortgages to one another at a very, very frenetic pace. For instance, in 2009, the house that I'm living in right now had its mortgage traded 21 times in 2 years. Now, what happens is that whenever these mortgages are traded, there's one physical mortgage document that you signed or whomever agreed to the mortgage, which in this case is probably you or your landlord. They signed a physical document. So someone had your mortgage when you bought, like when I bought this house in 2010 at a fire sale. This mortgage had been traded 21 times in the previous 2 years before I got it. And what happens is that some of these companies go out of business. In fact, a lot of these companies will go out of business. You could see 50, 75% of these companies go out of business if they're not bailed out. But even if they are bailed out, no, you're still going to have about 20 to 33% go out of business. And the problem is that this contract with your signature on it, it gets lost. It gets lost. No one gives a shit about tons of these mortgages when they've lost their paycheck. Do you think the person who's turning off the light is going to bother? No. And so what happens is that in like a in there's going to be such a huge backlog for foreclosures, and not just even foreclosures, for evictions. They have made evictions illegal until I believe May 30th. Let me just make sure. May 30 days past September, May 31st. Well, 90 days. 90 days from April 1st puts you at, okay, April, May, puts you at the end of June. At the end of June, millions and millions of people aren't going to be evicted for not paying their mortgages, so or rents. So I wonder how many didn't pay this week, and I wonder how many won't pay in 4 or 5 weeks. And when millions of people are dying in May, is anyone really going to pay their mortgage? I honestly don't think so. If you agree with Donald Trump that only 240,000 Americans tops will die of coronavirus, then maybe you should pay your mortgage. I mean, they're claiming that's the worst case, 240,000. If you think only 240,000 Americans will die of coronavirus, then maybe, just maybe, we can all be back to work by July, and there will just be a 6 to 9 month backlog on evictions and foreclosures, and maybe it's wise to keep paying out. But if you look at the death rates, so by June, you're looking at 740,000 dead. If there are 740,000 dead by June 1st, then you can count that people are going to start freaking out. They're going to be panicking. The economy is going to be crashing. The really bad thing about this pandemic is that the curve hasn't even started to become flat, and we've already basically killed our economy in the last 3 weeks. No signs of flattening at all. So that tells us that either it's much, much longer than 20 days incubation, and my numbers are even worse, and that it has a death rate of closer to 60% than 20, or or it has such a terrible R naught that it's evading even strict quarantine, which is not good. But anyway, so the main reason that you want to not pay your mortgage is that it's not unrealistic that your mortgage paperwork, its ownership could change hands 20 to 30 times in the next few weeks as these companies run into serious fiscal emergencies. What's going to happen is that no one will know where your mortgage is. No one will know who owns it. So when you don't pay your rent, when you don't pay your mortgage, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a huge court backlog. Courts are currently closed because of coronavirus. Look at that. All courts are closed through at least May, but because we know this won't go in, courts are going to be closed probably through August, November. The courts are going to be so backlogged because they're not able to process a single eviction right now. And so realistically, you're looking at whenever this coronavirus pandemic ends, plus about 2 to 3 years, maybe even 6 to 8. In fact, I don't even think they're going to worry about mortgages because no one will pay once they realize that you won't have to pay for 5 to 6 years. You can just live there for free. So if you look at 2008, but yeah. So anyway, the problem is that your mortgage is going to be passed around from banker to banker, and no one knows who owns what. So if you're renting a property, the most important thing to tell your landlord is that he probably can't find his mortgage. Like he can't, like the court of law has to find the mortgage in order for it to be valid. So what you need to do is you just, if you're a homeowner, you go up to the court. See, we could probably find this article. Foreclosure court couldn't bank couldn't produce mortgage contract, case thrown out. Here we go. If the lender can't find the mortgage. For decades, when troubled homeowners and banks battled over delinquent mortgages, it wasn't a contest. Homes went into foreclosure and lenders took control of the property. On top of that, courts rubber stamped the array of foreclosure charges that lenders heaped onto borrowers and took banks at their word when lenders said they owned a mortgage. It says ruling that lender PAH Mortgage hadn't proved its claim to a delinquent borrower's home. Judge Robert D. Drain wiped out $461,000 mortgage debt on the property. That's right, the mortgage debt disappeared via court order. The reason that notes have gone missing is the huge mass of mortgage securitizations. That's what I'm calling. That's what collateralized debt obligations are that we just watched. Securitizations allowed for large pools of banks to be bundled and sold. And but some of the nuts and bolts of the mortgage game, mortgage notes, for example, were never adequately tracked or recorded during the boom. In some cases, that means nobody truly knows who owns what. That's a prime money quote right there. So what's going to happen is that if we go and we look at the biggest home mortgage owners like Bank of America, and we look at how close they are to completely failing. They were at $34 and they went as low as $18, and now on Hopium they're up at $20. I don't see Bank of America surviving. I don't see JP Morgan surviving. But these are the too big to fail. The government will buy them, will probably bail them out. Just like they did 10 years ago. So, but that still doesn't mean they can produce the mortgage contract. So if you have the mortgage contract and you're a landlord, then you might be able to enforce it on a renter. However, the backlog is going to be so extreme that it's going to take at least a year after the courts open, and the courts probably won't even open until August at the absolute earliest. It just depends. I don't see anyone collecting on a mortgage until 2022 at the earliest. And or 2021, like the middle of 2021, if this thing blows over one way or another by like November. But even then, if you paid in the month of April, then by the time May comes around, there will be so many millions who are in the queue ahead of you to be evicted or to pass due that I just don't see it. I see the waiting period to be longer than the courts even realistically want to do, and I see a revolution if 80% of people are out of work and they're going to be kicked out of their homes. So the easiest thing the government could do is what's called a debt jubilee.